the best.
And after he became unconscious, they knew he only had a few hours left. He desperately needed an antibiotic and something to bring his fever down. But a few months into the Great Depression, most American families had run out of medication. Imagine this happening to your kid or grandkid. In a crisis where there are no pharmacies, no antibiotics, and no doctor around. But even though the boy's mother was desperate, her hands shaking and her tears flowing, the father was calm. He knew there was a plant that could heal the boy, a remedy that had been used for generations, long before penicillin was invented. And he knew he had that plant in their backyard, and it probably grows in your backyard as well. Today, nobody knows about this lost skill, but I'm sure you recognize this plant because it's spread all over America and Canada. If tomorrow all the pharmacies ran dry and you didn't have any other way to fight an infection, knowing this one plant would be a godsend. The Cherokee and the Mi'kmaq American natives were using this plant to break serious fevers and cure life-threatening infections. I'll tell you more about that plant in a moment. But first, let me tell you why I'm even talking to you today. My name is Claude Davis, and that little boy was my father. If my grandfather John Davis hadn't known about this special plant, the infection would have surely claimed his son's life that very night. And today, I'm going to share with you a piece of old-time wisdom that might save your life or the life of someone you love in a medical crisis. Grandpa made a tea from the plant. Then he cut the inner bark of a willow tree and made an infusion out of it. And if you ever get a high fever, inflammation, or any type of pain, just try it. It acts like a very powerful aspirin with enhanced pain-killing effects. In fact, the most important ingredient in aspirin is called salicylic acid, and it comes from the Latin word for willow tree, salix. Now, you wouldn't think it, but our forefathers knew that you can also use it to preserve your canned goods from toxic bacteria. In a few minutes, my grandfather's combined remedies brought the hellish fever down to 100, and in a short week, the infection was gone. His healing wisdom saved not only my father's life, but countless others over the next few decades. And today I'm going to share with you his lost knowledge of medicinal plants and remedies. I'm talking about common plants that can replace modern antibiotics and stop deadly infections, backyard weeds that can numb your pain just like morphine, and plants that can stop your bleeding in just minutes. Even plants that work better than most modern drugs to reverse joint damage from arthritis, lower your cholesterol, stabilize your blood sugar levels, and even prevent cancer from developing in your body. In fact, some of these plants I'm going to reveal are so powerful, modern medicine has just recently started to catch up with them. But more and more scientific studies show their healing power, which makes them essential for keeping you healthy during the worst of times. When the next deadly crisis hits America, you can be sure that life-saving meds will be the first to vanish off the shelves, and the cost of already expensive drugs is going to shoot through the roof. Now, the same thing will happen when Medicare runs out of money. What's still available and affordable now may soon be out of reach. And when this happens, your only hope is to treat yourself without them. So your backyard plants and common weeds can become your own medicine cabinet. Most of them are also edible and will keep you and your loved ones well fed, while other people will be cooking their leather shoes and belts. And let me tell you, when you haven't eaten for days and your immune system is at its weakest, it doesn't take much to put you into an early grave. That's exactly what happened to most families during the Great Depression, when it wasn't food shortages that claimed the most lives like you might expect. It was disease. People would wither and die from common colds and infections in their own homes, and many were discovered like that by their neighbors with food supplies intact. But in this video, I'll show you how to make 3 simple forgotten remedies that will ensure you keep your good health in a crisis, even when there's no doctor around. I got them from what's become my secret weapon for surviving any medical crisis, a lost manuscript from one of the best medicine men I ever met. The first remedy will show you how to make your own super powerful painkiller. The second one is probably the most powerful antibiotic that you can make at home right now. And the third one, well, it's a surprise. I'm sure you're going to love it. So, who am I and why should you believe every word I say? Well, I'm Claude Davis, and you may know me from my best-selling book, The Lost Ways. More than 200,000 American patriots are relying on it for the wisdom of our forefathers to thrive even in the darkest hours. Or like millions of others, you may have read my articles on AskAPrepper.com. But even though my books and articles are so popular, I never wanted to be famous. In fact, I tend to shy out of the public eye. This allows me to focus on my passion for unearthing the wisdom of the elders. You see, while people tend to be obsessed with everything new, with technology and smartphones and social media and cars that drive themselves, I was always intrigued by what I think was a happier, wiser, and even healthier America. A country of more independent people who had jobs and could care for their families, who took responsibilities and who were proud of being American, of building things, and of being number one. Progress brought us so many good things, but in many ways, things used to be much better. We're smarter, but we're not wiser. We own more stuff, but stuff we don't really need. And we live longer lives tied to medical equipment, but that doesn't mean we're healthier. Now, being the investigative driving force behind Ask a Prepper really drove this point home for me. My readers are just as fascinated with natural remedies that work either in a crisis or just for everyday health problems. And over time, I've seen it all. Thousands of lost remedies, what works and what doesn't. True miracles, as well as bogus cures that had no effect. And I had to sift through mountains of information. And I don't think I could have done it without the help of my late grandpa. This is a true American story that stretches over 100 years and 3 generations of my family. It's something I've given a lot of thought to about sharing or not, as what I'm about to reveal is deeply personal. But I only do it because this information will end up saving many American lives, and it could save yours as well. My great-grandpa was a Ukrainian priest on a mission. He wanted his ministry among Native Americans. And so it happened that my grandpa went from being fresh off the boat to playing real cowboys and Indians at the age of 7. It's there where he learnt his first medicinal plants. As he grew up, he became the right hand of the medicine man in the village, and he'd gather medicinal plants and turn them into powerful remedies like the joint pain ointment Gray Dakota. Now, if you're one of the lucky few who've tried it, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't had this opportunity yet and you're experiencing joint pain every now and then you're in luck. Because in a few minutes, I'll show you how you can make this lost remedy at home and use it whenever you're in need. From the medicine man, he also learned how to make his famous sand tea that brought people with kidney problems and later diabetes from all over the country to his doorstep. And it's also here where he discovered what is probably the only remedy for swollen feet. But that was just the beginning for Gramps. Grandpa's thirst for herbal cures couldn't be quenched easily, and he didn't stop at Native American remedies. So he went on his own mission. It was a mission to discover all the natural healers, the witch doctors, the old women with a knack for performing health miracles. And over the years, he tested these lost remedies on himself, on people, but most of all, during World War II. My grandfather was a pacifist, but he was also a patriot. He enlisted in the army not to kill, but to save as many lives as possible. If you'd been on the muddy battlefield of Petier, you would have seen 600 brave American soldiers carrying their backpacks and one who was carrying 2. And that was my grandfather, who brought his remedies with him. They converted a deserted French church into a makeshift hospital. By nightfall, it was all full of hundreds of wounded young Americans. And when the surgeons ran out of morphine, it was my grandfather who gave them relief. He had with him a powerful pain-killing extract made from this plant. Now, I'm sure you've seen it in your backyard, too. And just like my grandfather taught me, I'll show you today how to make it so you never have to worry about running out of painkillers. My grandfather would rush from soldier to soldier and bring a small vial of the extract to their lips. And in minutes, the loud groans and cries would subside to the amazement of all the army surgeons who had not seen anything like it before. He wasn't a medic, but after seeing how well his remedies worked, they let him do his job. With mortar shells and shrapnel flying all around him, he would plunge himself into the midst of battle and pull men to safety, stop their bleeding, disinfect their wounds, and ease their pain. And by the end of the war, every man in the 8th Infantry Division knew him as Dr. Davis. And since then, that's what people called him. Now, back home here in America, my grandfather never did get a medal for all of his efforts, although he probably saved just as many lives as the surgeons that he worked with in the fields of Normandy. But in the 60s, people from all over the country came seeking my grandfather. Our small farm was filled with the sick from dusk to dawn, and his supply of herbs was barely able to keep up. When I was a boy back in the 80s, he'd send me out to harvest the many types of plants and weeds that he needed for his medicines. And it was one of my favorite activities. He just gave me a simple journal that held drawings and descriptions for every medicinal plant you can imagine. It became my grandfather's lifelong dream to gather all the natural cures and remedies spread all over America. His plant journal he always kept by his side grew larger and larger. He began calling it the Book of Old Remedies. And when my grandfather left this world, more than 5,000 people from all over the world came to his funeral. Our small town of Springfield didn't have enough hotels to accommodate them, so everybody offered a place to stay. And while I didn't know most of them, they all knew my grandfather. And you know my grandfather too. You know him because you know his generation, the greatest generation. And maybe it was your father's or your grandfather's. If you knew one of them, you knew all of them. It was a generation shaped by hardships and turmoil that others after them would never face again. It was a generation that had to mature fast in order to survive the Great Depression and then fight in World War II. And they were willing to serve and sacrifice for the greater good. You could make a movie out of my grandfather's life. At his funeral, an old woman, Mary, told me how she had met my grandfather many years before. He was passing through her small town looking for a plant and heard that a 9-year-old girl was very sick. She had tuberculosis, a disease that almost surely killed you back then. Mary was dying in her mother's arms. And just try to imagine the feeling of helplessness and despair. And unfortunately, this is not a page closed to history. During many crises that came across time, say for example Katrina, antibiotics were the first to go off the shelves, and decent people died from common diseases that could have easily been treated with common plants. Anyway, at that time, an antibiotic for tuberculosis hadn't yet been invented, so my grandfather used this plant. Now, few Americans know about this graceful weed, and fewer still grow it in their backyard. When the organism is in high stress mode from fighting an infection, this is exactly what you need to bring it to balance and speed up the healing process. Now, the second plant my grandfather used was spotted loco weed, which he always prescribed for shortness of breath and pulmonary infections. After making a concoction out of the two plants, Mary was cured in 2 months, which is amazing considering nowadays it takes at least 6 months to treat it using powerful antibiotics. She enjoyed a life that came so close to ending prematurely. Now, I never knew her story until she told me. And as I looked around at the thousands gathered there, I realized my grandfather must have had many other stories and that a lot of people were only there thanks to his remedies. Was he able to save everyone no matter how advanced or how hard to treat the disease was? Of course not. If someone claims that they can treat your cancer with a miracle cure, you can bet they're crooks trying to take advantage of you. My grandfather wasn't like that. He genuinely cared about all of his patients and was honest with them from the beginning. He didn't have miracle cures, but real cures. I'm sure you remember someone like this too. Maybe your own grandparents or a healer whose remedies baffled doctors. Probably they didn't know as many remedies as my grandfather, but they must have had at least a few time-tested cures of their own. And when you got sick as a child, they worked just as well, if not better, than drugs. That's the kind of precious knowledge my grandfather tried to save and use for the common good all his life. Now let me tell you, my grandfather's funeral was an eye-opening moment for me. The times I spent with him on his ranch in Texas were some of the happiest of my life. When my grandfather died, he left me 3 things that I greatly treasure. The best childhood I could have ever dreamed of, the values that made the man that I am today, and a manuscript. But make no mistake, this is not just any kind of manuscript. It's something that all men and women from coast to coast should know about. It was his plant journal, his book of old remedies, and it began when he was young. My grandfather started writing down all the plants that he was gathering and then took notes of all the tinctures and concoctions used by the medicine man. He had it with him in the fields of northern France. It was what he used to treat many of our brave men when the antibiotics and the pain medications ran out. It's what saved my father's life during the Great Depression when most Americans died from disease and not starvation. It'll do the same in the next crisis. And even after the war, my grandfather's manuscript healed countless people. Some of them had conditions so severe that their own doctors didn't know what to do. And they all showed up on our doorstep. Desperate mothers with their children, hopeless seniors plagued by chronic pain, and even bedridden people brought by their relatives. I've seen them all. And my grandfather managed to treat most of them without using any toxic or addictive drugs. He used just what you might have right now in your backyard, weeds that you pass every day without even realizing their true power. This is why I say that this is probably the most precious thing my grandfather left me. I keep it in my medicine cabinet. It'll be there when I and my family need it the most.
Thank you for watching our video. I hope the information we presented shows you our excellent service. So what are you waiting for? Take action now and feel the change soon.